The tray hit the floor like a warning shot. Gravy splattered across a councilwoman's shoes. Lila, 25, waitress, already trembling, froze as the room turned on her. I just kept mopping until I saw my old olive handkerchief under the coffee urn. Ever seen someone punished for doing nothing wrong while the real mess got applause? The tray hit the floor like a slap in a silent room, metal on tile, gravy on shoes. For a full breath, the hall held its noise like a hymn just got interrupted. Then came the murmurs, the polite coughs, the slow shifting of forks back to plates, as if nothing had happened. But it had. Lila stood frozen in the center of it all, her hands still in midair, like she hadn't decided yet whether to pick it up or disappear through the floor. Her apron was askew. The collar of her white shirt had wilted under the heat, and right at her feet a pool of brown gravy was spreading like bad news. Mistakes echo louder in small towns. The walls here remember them better than people do. I was across the hall with a mop, supposedly invisible. That's half the point of this job: show up early, clean the windows. Nobody notices, then vanish before dessert. You don't get involved, you don't weigh in. You just polish and pass through. That night I had every intention of doing exactly that, until Elias opened his mouth. "That's not what was requested," he said, walking over in those crisp loafers like he was on the campaign trail, not just dinner duty. His voice was polite enough, but trained the way you speak when you're playing to a room. "Mrs. Hawthorne is vegetarian, Lila. This is brisket." Lila nodded quickly, stooping to grab the tray with shaking hands. "I'm sorry, sir. I misread. The training standards must be slipping." Elias continued, looking around the room, not at her. "We'll be reviewing staff protocol this week. Thank you for your patience, everyone." Polite applause. A few chuckles from the committee table. Mrs. Hawthorne smiled indulgently, as though the young waitress had just called her by the wrong title instead of nearly violating her principles. I saw Lila's jaw tighten, her eyes fixed on a spot somewhere above the salt shakers. I went back to mopping, but my hand had stopped moving. The bucket beside me made a dull splash, but my eyes were on Lila. I pulled out the stub pencil I kept in my back pocket, the one I used to mark loose screws or squeaky hinges, and jotted something in the corner of my notepad. Just a time and a name. Nothing more. Just enough. After the tables were cleared and the dessert cart rolled out like a last chance at redemption, I slipped into the break room. That's when I saw it. My handkerchief. Olive green. Folded once, but slumped like someone had used it to wipe a spill, and then thought better of it. It was tucked under the coffee maker, half hidden by a stack of plastic lids. I hadn't left it there. I picked it up carefully, shook off a fleck of sugar, and felt its familiar weight. A soft square of cotton hand-stitched on the edge. 3rd Rescue TSG. Roan. The name I used, once the name they called over radios when it was time to move, not talk. Still playing Soldier Uncle Rowan. The voice came from the doorway. Elias leaned against the frame like he belonged there, arms crossed, blazer unbuttoned just enough to look casual. I turned slightly but didn't answer. "I mean," he continued, walking in the cloth's a nice touch. "Folks might even think you still matter around here." He smiled that smile people wear when they've won before the game starts. The same one he had at 12 when he used to fix Monopoly boards, so he'd always land on Boardwalk. I never called him on it then either. I folded the cloth crease first. Smooth, even. The way we were taught even for something as small as this. I placed it into my pocket like it was worth something. Not because I needed to prove anything, just because some things deserve to be handled right. He was still standing there when I walked past him. Didn't say another word. Maybe he thought I didn't hear him. Maybe he didn't care. But he watched me leave the room, and I let him. Outside the hallway buzzed with leftover laughter and the scent of lemon squares. Lila was nowhere in sight. The tables had been reset, the chairs realigned. The kind of quiet that settles after a public moment has passed and people want to pretend it never happened. But I've lived long enough to know silence doesn't erase anything. It just leaves it waiting. The memo wasn't crooked when I first saw it, but somehow it looked that way. A single sheet of white paper pinned straight through the center with a push pin the color of blood orange punch. It sat just above the water cooler like a warning taped to a door. In bold red ink, Position Redundancy Review. Phase 2. No explanation, no signature, just the town hall seal and the date. I'd seen war zone notices more courteous. They don't fire you in towns like Stockton. They restructure, reassign, realign resources. That's the language now. In the military, you call it decommissioning. Here it's streamlining. Either way, someone ends up packing a box. The hallway outside the records room always smells like forgotten paperwork, humid yellowing, persistent. Ceiling tiles pucker at the edges. The light overhead flickers like it's working up the courage to go out for good. I was leaning against the wall watching Ms. Carey pretend not to see me. She stood by her file cart reshuffling papers she'd already filed. I nodded. She nodded back. Nothing more. Then came the sound of loafers. Steady, clean, deliberate. Elias. Uncle Rowan, he called as if this were Thanksgiving and he'd just spotted me beside the mashed potatoes. Got a minute. He didn't wait for my answer, just kept walking, assuming I'd follow. I did. It's easier sometimes. His office was still that windowless corner behind the supply closet. They'd given him a desk too big for the space, so he had to slide sideways to get in. On the walls, a framed print of a bald eagle, a plaque about excellence in local governance, and a faded calendar showing last October. He gestured to the folding chair across from him. "Sit if you like." I remained standing. He reached into his desk and pulled out a manila envelope. "Just a formality," he said, handing it over. "Streamlining initiative. You understand." The envelope made a soft, slick sound as I opened it. Inside, a single-page letter printed on letterhead. Notice of role dissolution, effective 30 days from receipt. Language, sterile enough to be surgical. I looked at him, raised one brow. He smiled. "Legacy roles like yours are hard to justify. No offense." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because too many years in uniform had taught me silence unsettles more than shouting. He opened another drawer. This one squeaked and pulled out something folded. My cloth. The olive green handkerchief. The same one I'd tucked in my back pocket the night of the community dinner. It was unfolded now, smoothed in a messy rectangle, the corners misaligned. He held it up like it was a novelty. "Cute touch," he said. "A bit theatrical." Then he folded it backwards, sloppily creased it along the wrong line and tossed it across the desk. It fluttered once before landing near the edge, the embroidered edge crumpled. I took it without a word. That all I asked, keeping my voice even. For now. He leaned back. "Appreciate your years of service." I left without touching the envelope again. Folded the cloth properly as I walked. Thumbed the edge until the stitches lined up. Some things don't hold their shape if you let other people handle them. That night, the office halls had that tired echo of fluorescent light and a fax machine someone forgot to unplug. I was finishing the supply log when I heard soft steps behind me. "Mr. Whitlow." I turned. Lila stood near the doorway holding something in her hand. Her ponytail was damp from the rain and her apron was gone, replaced with a worn cardigan that made her look more like a student than staff. She handed me a folded piece of paper. Yellowed, folded soft at the edges like it had lived in someone's drawer too long. "I think you should see this," she said. I found it while helping Ms. Carey reorganize in February. He had this altered. It was a maintenance invoice, dated June 2019, my signature at the bottom. The line item read, "Boiler repair, urgent, $2,600. But the amount had been changed, correction fluid, printed overlay, something subtle. I didn't ask how she knew. The look in her eyes told me she didn't need me to. "Keep it," she said. I made a copy. I watched her go, the click of her shoes receding down the hallway like a thought you try not to follow. Back in my utility locker, I placed the invoice in a file marked MISC. I didn't have a better name for it yet, but I had a feeling I'd be needing more folders soon. The first thing I noticed was the creak of the porch swing, lazy and slow like a metronome stuck between beats. Then I saw him. Reverend Amos Bledsoe sitting beneath the sagging roof of First Methodist's front stoop like he'd been carved there. Didn't wave. Didn't call. Just waited until my boots hit the edge of the gravel path. "You still carry that old rag?" he asked, voice steady as always, like sermon tone hadn't faded from his bones. I nodded, hand resting in my back pocket where the cloth usually lived. It was there now, creased just right, edges frayed but still whole. "You mind sitting?" he added, patting the cushion beside him. The cushion gave a wheeze when I sat. Dust rose in little clouds from the seams, and a rusted wind chime above us tapped out a rhythm against the breeze. Somewhere inside, a clock chimed 4:30. The church had been empty for hours, but Bledsoe had made it feel full with his stillness alone. He reached under the swing, pulled out a wrinkled manila folder. The clasp was rusted, bent sideways like it had been opened too many times. He opened it slowly, like unwrapping something sacred, and laid a piece of paper across the swing's wooden plank between us. A hand-drawn map, yellowed, creased. The ink had bled slightly from age. Across the top, in tidy block letters, Red Hollow Evac Plan, June 2003. Below that, faint initials in the corner, CRW. He tapped the letters with a thick finger. "You remember?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. I nodded. The image was already forming in my mind, rain against my helmet, the crackle of radios that had gone silent, the stench of wet sandbags and fear. Operation Red Hollow. I hadn't said those words aloud in nearly 2 decades. "You held the flood line when the levee gave," he said. "Kept 37 people from getting swept over the dam. I was just doing the checklist." "No," he said. "You were leading." He folded the map slowly, hands lingering on the edges. "You didn't care for medals, said paperwork got in the way of repairs. But I filed a version anyway. It never got processed. Timing was off. New CO rotated in, but I kept a copy." He reached deeper into the folder and pulled out a photo, black and white, bent at the corners, one edge smudged with old fingerprints. He handed it to me without ceremony. It showed me, or at least a younger version. Knee-deep in water, shoulders squared against a current, one hand gripping the side of a stretcher. A child lay inside, wrapped in a tarp. Around my neck, the olive cloth darker than knotted tight beneath my collar. I didn't speak, just stared. Bledsoe sighed. They forgot. That's what happens. When you stop showing up in uniform, you become background. The wind picked up. The steeple-shaped chime above us swayed with a groan. "I think your nephew might need reminding who you really are." His words hung between us like incense smoke. Just then Lila appeared. She held 2 styrofoam cups, steam rising from each. She handed one to Bledsoe, then offered me the other without a word. She sat on the church steps, not intruding, just listening. After a moment she spoke. "So do others." Neither of us replied, but something shifted. A weight tilted a hinge unstuck. Bledsoe sipped his coffee, then looked at the sky. "You ever think," he said softly, "about what we leave behind that isn't written down?" "Every day," I answered. He smiled at that. I folded the map carefully, tucking it and the photo back into the folder. My name, CRW, stared back up at me from the corner, faint but still legible. We sat in silence a while longer. The cushion between us bore the weight of memory dust and a kind of reverence you don't find much anymore. When I stood to leave, Lila stood too. She didn't ask anything else. Didn't need to. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then to me. She understood. As I walked down the steps, I heard the wind chime ring, once clear, solitary. The kind of sound that doesn't just mark a breeze, but a beginning. I hadn't planned on wearing the cloth. It was already folded and tucked in my chest pocket from that morning habit more than anything. Some people carry a wallet. I carry memory. Didn't expect anyone to notice. Certainly didn't expect Elias to weaponize it. The council prep dinner was always the same: too many folding chairs, not enough forks and casseroles that arrived lukewarm no matter when they were baked. Students from the high school had made centerpieces, paper hydrangeas with glitter stems meant to feel festive. Mostly they just stuck to your elbows if you leaned too close. I stayed near the end of the buffet behind the chafing dish marked eggplant surprise. My job wasn't on the official invite, but I'd been setting up chairs and fixing the coffee urn longer than half the committee had been breathing. Lila was pouring sweet tea, careful with her tray this time. She didn't look at me, but she knew I was there. Elias took the makeshift podium around dessert time. He wore his usual smirk dark tie and the kind of confidence that floats on unchecked applause. "We're grateful," he said, "for every volunteer, every staffer, every supporter of progress in Stockton." The room gave him polite smiles, the kind you offer when you're waiting for the check. And of course he added, raising his plastic cup. Even Uncle Calder came dressed for duty tonight. He turned toward me, gesturing with a wide grin. "Check out the pocket square." Chuckles. Not loud, but sharp, like silverware clinking too hard on china. The council chairwoman, a woman with a handshake like ice cubes, leaned over and whispered something to the treasurer. He snorted into his napkin. One of the junior members' boy, barely out of grad school, asked too loudly, "Wait, did he actually serve?" The laughter that followed was dry and rustling, like paper cuts. Lila froze mid-pour. I smiled, nodded once, and stood up. Didn't speak. Didn't explain. I've learned explanations often serve the accuser more than the accused. In the break room, the lights flickered once before settling into their usual yellow hum. I found the small sink beside the instant coffee station and unpinned the cloth from my pocket. A streak of balsamic vinaigrette trailed across one corner, probably from the Caesar tray. I ran water over it, rubbed gently. The stain lightened, but it didn't leave. I kept washing anyway. The room was quiet, but not peaceful. Just resigned. A fridge hummed. The wall clock clicked. Somewhere down the hallway, a door opened and closed. I was drying the cloth under a hand dryer when Lila appeared in the doorway. She didn't speak at first. Just stood there, holding something in both hands. A small plastic object worn at the edges. When she stepped closer, I saw it was a flash drive, red casing, cracked loop at the top where a keychain once went. "Found this," she said, voice soft. "Old tech drawer, bottom file." It was wedged under a ream of printer labels. I took it, felt its faint warmth from her hand. He tried to delete the backup she added. But this is from before. February, maybe even January. What's on it I don't know, but it has his initials on the file name. Date stamps match the audit week. I nodded, slipped it into the same pocket the cloth had been in. She didn't stay, just turned and walked back toward the main hall. The swing of the door behind her was gentle, like she'd meant not to let it slam. I finished drying the cloth, but the vinaigrette left a faint outline like a bruise beneath skin. Couldn't scrub it out without tearing the fibers. And some things aren't meant to be bleached clean, just carried differently. As I walked home that night, the town around me had already settled into its routines. Porch lights flickering on dogs barking at empty driveways, sprinklers misting sidewalks. No one walked this late. I took the long way past the ball field, then the fire station, just to let the quiet stretch. At the corner before my block, I stopped under the street lamp, pulled out the cloth, refolded it slowly the way I always did. But this time I turned the stained corner in, tucked it beneath the folds. Let the cleaner side face out, still useful. Not every mark means ruin. Some just mean you've been through something worth remembering. I didn't expect Bledsoe to walk through the chamber doors like he still belonged there. But there he was, tie-straight boots, polished manila envelope tucked under one arm like it contained the gospel. He didn't knock, just nodded at the clerk and made his way across the dusty linoleum with the weight of someone who'd once been saluted in places noisier than this. The council prep room smelled like stale coffee and overheated toner. Ceiling fans spun slow above our heads, doing little more than shifting the dust. Light filtered through crooked blinds, striping the council table like prison bars. A stack of agenda folders sat on the sideboard untouched. I was already seated when Bledsoe arrived, and so was Elias, leaning back in his chair like he owned the table. Lila stood quietly behind the row of chairs, holding a legal pad and pretending not to exist. 2 council members whispered about grant allocations. The chairwoman tapped her pen against a ceramic mug. Bledsoe didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew his name, even if they preferred to forget what it stood for. He set the manila envelope on the table without ceremony, slid a folded piece of paper out and placed it in front of the chairwoman. A map, he said. Hand-drawn. Flood evac routes. June 2003. Red Hollow. The chairwoman blinked, picked up the map, tilted it toward the light, frowned. These routes, they're not part of the town's official archive. They wouldn't be, Bledsoe said calmly. They were improvised. Field drawn. Executed without radio support. Held the line until backup arrived. He tapped the bottom corner of the map. There, barely visible in pencil, were 3 letters, CRW. Elias shifted in his chair. With respect, Reverend, I don't see how this pertains to Bledsoe, cut him off. It pertains because the man you're trying to erase is the same man who drew that line while half this room was still in school. He opened the envelope fully and pulled out a second document. This one, a faded copy of a field report. Typed lines. Watermarks. Redacted names. Operation Red Hollow, he said. This is the original evac log. Call sign Roan 47. He turned to me. You stitched that number into your handkerchief. Remember? I nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The corner of that cloth peeked from my jacket pocket, folded neat. Still stained from the vinaigrette. Still mine. Bledsoe stepped back. I believe that establishes precedent. The chairwoman looked from him to me, then to Elias. Lila stepped forward quietly. Said nothing. Just plugged a flash drive into the council laptop. The screen flickered, then blinked to life. A folder opened. Inside budget files labeled by month. One file bore Elias's initials. Another bore mine. But the timestamps didn't match the ones on the town's server. She clicked. A metadata window appeared. This file was altered, she said, voice steady. Original version saved January 12th. Modified February 3rd. Re-uploaded under Calder Whitlow's directory without his login. The room fell silent. A single blinking light on the flash drive pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The chairwoman adjusted her glasses. Mr. Whitlow, she said, turning to Elias, you didn't list this gentleman's name in any of the Phase 2 redundancy filings. You didn't mention Operation Red Hollow in your personnel history cross-check. Care to explain? Elias opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw worked like a man chewing stone. Legacy roles are often miscategorized. We didn't find digital confirmation. That's convenient. the second council member muttered. Lila stepped back without another word. I didn't move, didn't gloat. I just let the quiet stretch. The chairwoman looked at the rest of the table. I recommend we freeze all restructuring decisions pending formal review. No one objected. Agreed, she added, marking a line on her agenda. We'll request independent audit and archive reconciliation. Bledsoe gave me a glance. No smile, just a soft nod, the kind passed between men who've shared foxholes and funerals. He turned to leave envelope empty now, mission complete. Elias stared down at the table. His fingers drummed against his coffee cup, but the beat was off. He didn't look at me. Lila gathered her papers. When she passed behind him, she paused just long enough to meet my eyes. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. Outside the prep room, the hallway lights flickered once and held. I stepped out last, the folder under my arm, now the cloth tucked close. As I walked past the portraits of past council chairs, the air felt just a little less thick. It wasn't meant to be a ceremony. No podium, no agenda. Just pulled pork on paper plates, lemonade in styrofoam cups, and folding chairs that creaked every time someone shifted weight. The rec hall buzzed with that specific kind of summer fatigue heat lingering in the concrete floor fans, pushing hot air from one side to the other like tired sighs. The country band was still tuning up outside when I arrived. I almost didn't go. Didn't want the eyes, the murmurs. But Bledsoe had called me that morning with a tone that wasn't exactly a request. "They're putting up a slideshow," he said. "You should at least eat something." So I came, sat near the wall, close to the exit. Old habit. Most of the veterans sat in a loose semicircle around the buffet table, their plates balancing ribs and coleslaw and potato salad with too much mustard. Lila waved when she saw me. She was seated beside Ms. Carey from the clerk's office, chatting softly. Elias sat near the back posture, rigid arms crossed. I noticed his paper plate was empty. Halfway through the evening, when the room was settling into that quiet hum of digestion and polite laughter, the projector flickered on. Dust danced in the light beam. A photo appeared on the far wall. Grainy, black and white. A man, me knee-deep in floodwater, gripping the handle of a stretcher with one hand, the other arm outstretched. Around my neck, that familiar cloth. Damp, twisted. Still there. I didn't know they had that image. The laughter faded. Bledsoe stood. He didn't clear his throat or ask for attention. He didn't need to. "I took that photo," he said, voice level. Red Hollow, 2003. Plastic forks hovered mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. He didn't wait for orders. Bledsoe continued. Didn't radio for approval. The line failed. He led the evac across the west dam while most of us were still figuring out where the breach was. He paused. Not dramatically. Just enough to let the words land. He never got written up for it. Not in any official file. That was his request. Another pause. Longer this time. He didn't want a medal. He wanted it done. Then slowly, Bledsoe stepped back from the table, straightened his spine, raised his hand in salute. The gesture wasn't sharp. Age had taken some of that, but it held weight, stillness, a kind of stillness that settled into your bones. Across the room, one chair scraped backward, then another. A veteran with a Marine Corps tattoo stood. No words, just lifted a hand over his heart. A third man stood, boots clicking faintly on the tile. He didn't salute, just removed his cap. By the time the fourth rose, the room was silent. Even the air seemed to hush. Elias sat motionless, jaw tight. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple and pooled behind his ear. His hands clenched the edge of his folding chair. White knuckles. But he didn't stand. I didn't speak, didn't nod. just rose slowly and returned Bledsoe's salute. No flourish, just steadiness, just enough. My hand hovered for a moment, then dropped. The projector whirred. No applause followed. No cheers. That wasn't the point. One by one, the others sat again. The band outside started a slow instrumental fiddle and steel string, soft and reverent. Someone sniffled. A plastic fork hit a plate with a tiny clink. Lila glanced at me. Her eyes were damp, but she didn't blink. She mouthed something I couldn't quite catch. Maybe it was, finally. Maybe thank you. I sat back down. Didn't touch my plate. Didn't need to. Across the room, Elias adjusted his collar. Still seated. Still silent. But something in his shoulders had shifted. Not broken, but bent. For the first time, I felt no urge to speak. The room had already said everything. I showed up Monday morning at 6 sharp. The hall was quiet, same as always. No brass band, no folded banners, no small-town press looking for a human interest headline. Just the faint smell of floor wax from Friday's mopping and the mop bucket I'd left in the janitor's closet still sitting like it never missed me. The lock on the east stairwell still jammed if you turned it too quickly. The flickering light in the supply room still hadn't been replaced, and the staff kitchen had a familiar ring of dried coffee under the left burner, just as I remembered. It was a strange kind of comfort that nothing had changed without me. I walked the halls in slow rhythm, the way I always did, left hand grazing the wall out of habit, right hand holding my keyring low so it wouldn't jingle. First, I fixed the flickering bulb in the hallway outside records. Then I stocked paper towels in the break room, wiped the counters, checked the boiler once just to make sure it wasn't hissing. I didn't expect to find gratitude waiting for me behind any of those doors. Gratitude, I learned a long time ago, is a strange luxury. You work to keep things from breaking, not to be thanked. If it works, people forget it was ever in danger. At 8:13, I heard footsteps. Not rushed, but measured. Elias. He came around the corner holding a manila envelope, the same kind I'd received when they reviewed my role 3 months ago. He didn't say good morning, just looked at me like someone who was about to apologize but couldn't find the words that wouldn't cost him something. Pending resignation, he said, offering the envelope. Goes into effect next week. I didn't take it right away. Let him hold it a second longer than was polite. I watched the tension in his fingers, the way the corners of the envelope bent under his grip. He used to hold footballs like that when he was 12, tight controlling the seams like he could will the play to go his way. He let go first. I nodded. Thanks for letting me know. That was all. He stood there for another beat like he had something else ready, some scrap of admission or a decent goodbye. But then he turned, straightened his jacket, adjusted his collar like it mattered, and walked out without a sound. I didn't follow. Back in the kitchen, the fluorescent light buzzed softly overhead. I turned the kettle on out of habit, reached for the dented blue mug I'd used for 8 years, the one with the chipped rim I always rotated away from my lip. I was reaching for the instant coffee tin when I noticed something new. Above the sink where the community notices used to hang, someone had installed a narrow shelf. On that shelf stood a wooden shadow box, maybe 12 inches wide. Inside, carefully pinned to a navy blue backing, was my olive green handkerchief. Clean pressed, folded the way it was meant to be, crease running edge to edge like the ridge of a parade field. Below it was a small metal placard. I didn't have to lean close to read it. In quiet service, some things remain folded but never forgotten. I stared at it for a while. Lila's voice came from behind me. Too much I didn't turn right away. Just kept looking. The cloth didn't look new, but it didn't look tired either. I could still see the tiny fray on the bottom corner, the spot where I'd once caught it on barbed wire pulling someone out of a creek. I'd stitched it closed that night in the back of a truck while pretending it didn't matter. The thread was still visible, crooked and too tight. Finally I said, "Just enough." She nodded, didn't smile too much, just leaned on the doorway holding her coffee like it was a form of prayer. "You know," she said quietly, "the kids saw the photos from Red Hollow. One of them asked me last week why nobody ever wrote about it." I shrugged. Some stories get swallowed by mud. Maybe they just waited for the right person to tell it. I looked at her then. She looked steady, not proud exactly, but anchored, like someone who'd found her footing again. She hadn't cried since that day with the tray. I remembered that tray the same way I remembered the hiss of old pipes or the thud of army boots on wet concrete. It wasn't the tray that mattered, it was who picked it up. I set the blue mug under the drip spout, poured the water. The smell hit like always burnt, cheap, perfect. We didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. The rest of the morning was spent fixing the vent over room 12, clearing cobwebs from the attic stairs, logging the month's supply list. Routine returned like an old friend you forgot you missed. I moved through it with no rush, no pride, just rhythm. Around noon, I stepped out back to where the sunlight hit the east brick wall just right. There was a shadow stain there from an old plaque long since taken down. I traced it absently, fingertips brushing warm stone. The plaque hadn't said anything important, just something about grant funding. But now above it I imagined a different name. Not mine, not anyone's. Just service rendered. No cameras, no edits, no parade. That'd be enough. Back inside, the coffee had gone cold. I didn't reheat it. I just sat. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prepare for the next thing to be taken. They didn't ask me to speak, which suited me just fine. October brought a crisp hush to Stockton, and the garden behind Town Hall was dressed in fallen leaves and polite silence. The new bench sat under 2 maples' brass plaque gleaming in the sun. Whitlow Hall, in honor of quiet valor. Beneath it, behind glass, was the olive handkerchief cleaned but still bearing the faded stain. A small note read, "Operation Red Hollow 2003. Courage documented by action, not ceremony." A boy read the final line aloud. "Truth doesn't require volume, just presence." No applause followed, just the sound of leaves shifting. A veteran doffed his cap. A teacher explained what it meant to lead without reward. Across the lawn, Elias stood at the fence, alone, silent. Our eyes met. He gave the smallest nod, not regret, but recognition. I nodded back. The bench wasn't guarded. It wasn't sacred, but it would remain. The kids had gone, but the garden held their echoes, the bench still warm from sun and small legs, the brass plaque catching dusk like it belonged there all along. From a few steps away, I watched a leaf land on the glass that framed the handkerchief. This time it stayed clean. Sometimes the long way round is the only way to be seen for who you are. Titles fade, but quiet decency doesn't rust. And the truth, it doesn't need a microphone, just a place to sit. Has life ever handed you a second chance, dressed like a dead end? Tell me I'm listening. And if stories like this speak to you, you're welcome to stay a while.